Hey everybody, today's January 7th. That means we're reading Galatians 5, 1 through 15. And the book of Galatians is really divided up into three parts. The first two chapters that we've already read was really Paul defending his apostleship and where he stood that he could claim these things. The third and the fourth chapter were really his message about what justification was, that right standing before God, that really kind of salvation. Chapters 5 and 6, which we're getting into today and then for a couple days, is the idea of showing the practical living of justification. And so we see right here in the beginning of chapter 5 this idea where he gives some dangers of the false doctrine. He kind of gives us kind of really four dangers. We see in verse 2 where he says there's that really Christ is no benefit. And he's basically saying, look, if you accept circumcision, then there's no advantage of the gospel. Now, circumcision just was one of the many things that these Judaizers was adding to the gospel. But it was something that was evident. It was something that you could be proven. It was a little extreme. And so he was just using this one thing of circumcision to be kind of speaking for the whole part of all these works. But he's saying if you accept all these rules and all these laws that you're adding to the gospel, then what benefit is Jesus? What benefit is grace? If you have to check every religious spiritual box, there is no grace in that because there's eventually you're not going to be able to check those boxes. So if you believe in this false doctrine, Christ is no benefit. The second thing we see is you're obligated to keep the whole law. If you say, okay, I want to be circumcised and I like this rule and that rule and this rule, well, then you have to keep them all because the law says that you have to do 100%. So if they stick to this false doctrine, Christ is no good and they have to keep up with all of the law, every little minute detail. The third thing that we see is in verse 4 is that we've fallen from grace. He used this word that we've been severed or we've been separated or cut loose from. That we've been fallen, which means to lose one's grasp. And basically, it's just saying that a person cannot live by the law and by grace. It's not talking about that they're losing their salvation. It's not talking about falling from heaven, falling from grace. It's just simply saying that if you say, I have to keep all of these rules, you literally have jumped off of grace. You don't care about grace and mercy anymore. It's all about you and your standards and your rules and what you can do. And the fourth thing that we see that Paul teaches here is that it excludes us from righteousness. And so in verses 5 and 6, we see this idea that there's really three things about a godly life. One is we live through the Spirit, not through the flesh. We live by the Holy Spirit, not by the works and all the checklist of these spiritual prisons that these people are being put into. Secondly, is we live by faith, not by works. Our faith is in the gospel of Jesus Christ, not in how good we are. We would never be good at all. And lastly is that life lived in patient waiting and hope, rather than kind of this anxious uncertainty of, man, did I do every task? Did I tilt the scale just good enough to get into heaven or not? When you believe in those false doctrines and you start adding to the gospel, it takes away so much things from the gospel: peace, hope, certainty, security, all these things that we hold to true in what the Bible teaches us. It goes on, though, in verses kind of 7 through 15, and it tells us about characteristics of these false teachers. How do you know people are saying bad things? They're adding to the gospel. And he kind of just almost gives us one on every verse. One is they hinder the truth. Nobody's obeying the truth. He asks this rhetorical question: who has hindered you? When I left you, you were perfect. You were good. You believed in the gospel. But now somebody's holding you back. Somebody's hiding you from the truth. False teachers hide the truth. Secondly is they are not God. False teachers act as the authority. And that's what these Judaizers did. They came in and said, no, Jesus isn't the way. He is the way, but you have to do this, this, and this. They put themselves above. They make themselves the God, the determiner of who and what gets done. So it's very important. Thirdly, we see that they contaminate the church. Every church knows this, especially in North America today. People with negative attitudes who care more about tradition and works and rules and laws, they contaminate the church. They bring the church down because they don't care about these things, about truth and about love and about mercy and grace. It's all about these steps. Verse 10, we see that they judge, once again, putting themselves above everybody else. They are the judge, they are the jury, they are the person who holds the guillotine. And that's always kind of a scary place to be. Only God is that person. Verse 11 is they persecute true teachers. Not only do they hide fake doctrine, but those who are teaching true gospel, man, they tear them down. And then we see that with Paul. They're constantly tearing him down, tearing him down, tearing him down. They don't want to do this. And in verse 12, Paul makes one of the most extreme statements he ever makes in all of the Gospels, in anything that he writes. They're talking about circumcision. And so Paul says, kind of at the end of verse 12, he says, well, if circumcision's good, let's go all the way. And he says, I hope they emasculate themselves. I hope they mutilate themselves. I hope they castrate themselves. Just don't, if circumcision's good, go all the way, right? Go 100% all in. And so Paul's not saying, well, man, if I see them, I hope they just castrate themselves. He's not doing that. He's saying, if they're saying works is the way to heaven, then by all means, let's go to 150% of works. If circumcision's good, let's castrate ourselves. If working 20 hours a day is good, let's work 23 hours a day. And so he's using that step. I'm glad you guys are with us. I know this was kind of a long day, but there's a lot there. We are almost done with the book of Galatians. Hang in there. We'll see you tomorrow. God bless.